I'm back! Hello everybody, this is Chaotic People File. It feels so good to be back. It feels so good to have handed in my dissertation. I'm going to do like a bit of a life update, I guess, after I'm done catching up. But what basically is going to happen during September, hopefully, is that I'm going to catch up with all of the book reviews that I haven't done. So like the wrap-ups in the format that I did my last one, I will link it down below and in the eye as always. And then I'm going to upload Sayaka Murata, which I filmed, Entangled Life, Felicity, and Justine. So all those 4 reviews will be up after the wrap-ups. And I am also going to announce the book for the October book club. So the book club is coming back, don't worry, and I'm going to catch up. I just gave us August and September as a bit of a break. The reason I want to get done with the wrap-ups first is because I need to do an on-haul pretty soon. The book situation is getting a bit unwieldy, and I have news about that as well. I have some videos planned, TBR related. I'm just so excited. Yesterday, I read half of a book, like an actual book, pretty much in a day. And sure, it's kind of a light book. I'm going to talk about it for the book-to-prize wrap-up. But just the thought of having 2 hours to read and, you know, not have to take notes or anything. Well, I was kind of taking notes for the review, but you know what I mean? It's not the same. Regardless of how much I do love thinking about books in a lit student way, I'm just happy to be done with it for a while. Anyways, books. I'm going to tell you about the books that I read in July, and then also some other books that I have from previous months. Speaking of this, let's start with 2 books that I read for my dissertation. The first one is Shirley Jackson's The Road Through the Wall. This was her first novel, which was published in 1949. I feel like I should know this already because I quoted it a bunch of times. So I wrote on Shirley Jackson, and I never thought I would end up doing like a single author thesis, but it was actually super fun. And this is a story set in a fictional suburban town called Cabrillo in San Francisco, and specifically it focuses on Pepper Street. And what is so interesting is that if you've read We Have Always Lived in the Castle or The Haunting of Hill House, you'll be like, WTF is this? It is so modernist. It's basically just fragments, and although there are certain climaxes of action, especially with like violent or very transgressive events, nothing really happens in terms of narrative arc. It's just so flat with spikes. It's literally that. And I find that fascinating. I didn't expect it to be like that, but it gripped me. I wanted to keep reading it, even though it was such a chore because I was reading it for my dis. I was still so absorbed. And so this is closer to the lottery, and often it is studied only as a precursor for the lottery. Even Ruth Franklin, her biographer, says, oh yeah, this is a slider work. I just think it's a different work. I personally don't think We Have Always Lived in the Castle is as accomplished as everyone said. Like, I love that book, but I think when I read her other novels, I'm actually going to prefer them, and I prefer the short stories like by a landslide. So it's just interesting to me that this novel is like so looked down upon, and it wasn't massively successful at the time, and I can see why, because it basically has no plot, and the point is sort of that all the events don't amount to anything. It doesn't really have a protagonist, and that is fascinating. It's this community is the protagonist, but also it's such a fragmented community. It is not the community as a whole. It's not when you say like the family is the character. No. So it is very interesting. It is full of that shockingly dark Shirley Jackson brand of gothic and absurd, and I actually really recommend it. If you've never read anything by Shirley Jackson, I do not recommend you start here, but if you have, then I actually do recommend you read this. I was going to talk only about Racing Demons because Life Among the Savages I actually read like a few months ago, but let's talk about these 2. These are Life Among the Savages and Racing Demons, both memoirs that Shirley Jackson wrote. And it is interesting because they are sold as memoirs, they are in the nonfiction section, they were columns that she wrote and then she reworked them into books, so they do not read as columns, although they are highly episodic. These focus on her life as a mother, first moving to the suburbs to North Bennington because her husband worked there, but also they were forced to move. Basically, their landlord evicts them from their apartment in the city, and then here it's more life in suburbia. They are hilarious, but they are also anxiety-inducing because you can sense underneath the humor, a lot of the things that you're reading are actually quite unnerving. And again, this is part of the Jackson magic, I would argue. They are really, really fun to read, and I really recommend it. And actually, these are the works that brought her widespread attention and acclaim. So while the literary world, the New Yorker world, was praising her for stuff like The Lottery and actually often looked down on these works, these were her best sellers. These were the ones that made her famous outside of that, you know, critical literary bubble. These were the moneymakers. And so it's riveting to see that they are actually excellently written. And if you read The Lottery and Other Stories for the book club, which I will link the review for down below, you will have read Charles, a short story that is actually taken almost word by word. Literally, there is one little clarification in the short story to signal that Laurie is Jackson's son, or like the narrator in that story's son. But the story itself, it's just like the one here. Everything else, word for word. So it just raises a lot of interesting questions, because one scholar does say that Jackson never really claimed that these were not fictionalized or sensationalized. So it's interesting that we read them as nonfiction. Like, she just published the sketches almost like they were short stories, and some of the sketches became short stories. So it's just very interesting to think on that respect. But just on their own, they're just interesting accounts of the oppressive nature of suburbia, while still also Jackson not being really bitter by her position. Like, she had conflicting thoughts and feelings, but she still loves her kids and finds a lot of joy in like baking for them and helping them through stuff, and she finds true wonder in their strangeness. So it's just like a really interesting mix, and I highly recommend them. If you think that her short fiction is not for you, or her novels are not for you because you're not really into like that sort of psychological horror, uncanny stuff, read these, because these are just such a perfect balance of the humor, the domestic, the personal, but also dealing with quite important stuff. Her voice is just so charming, and her kids are hilarious. So I really recommend it. Okay, let's get saucy with a DNF that pains me. And actually, that's what made me push through further than I would have otherwise. But I DNF'd the sequel to Dante and Alire. This is Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World by Benjamin Alire Sáez. It's just not good. And you will say, you barely read YA anyways. Yes, but I did reread the first one in 2020, was it? I remember it was lockdown. And I reread it and I liked it. I did think, I remember very clearly, that yes, I wished someone else had written this book, that it was written not for YA people, because I loved the characters so much, but it was all right. This one, I just found the prose like unbelievably bland, and nothing makes sense, and everything happens so quickly. I can feel the pressure of writing something that was as good as the first one, or as beloved, and I just think sadly he crumbled under it. It's about, I don't know, just like them continuing their relationship. And I'm all for, like, you know me, quotidian mumblecore sort of love books, but this was just not good, so I DNF'd it, and it pained me so much to do so. Something completely the opposite that I actually inhaled, Sassy Planet by Harish, Bhandari, David Dodge, Nick Schiarizzi, and illustrated by Bráulio, Amado. I have, since I purchased this in Lisbon, I'm going to link that book haul down below so you can check it out. Since then, I have seen this actually in London. Very beautiful book, by the way. Look at that look at that quality of illustrations and also the layout and everything. The tagline is a queer guide to 40 cities. So this is basically a travel guide for queer people. What I like is that it actually covers the entire world. Not every place, of course, but it gives you examples for a lot of cities, and even cities that it's not that you wouldn't expect, just cities that are often neglected, like Latin American cities. I was very excited to see Santiago there. I enjoyed this so much. Of course, it's easy to read. It has a lot of illustrations and not that much text, but I love that they included locals' advice. They were also very aware of the overwhelming predominance of male cis gays in queer scenes, or like our idea of queer culture. So they always offered alternatives, or just made sure to point out what these spaces were and like who was welcomed in there, and really uplifted more indie or more underground spaces. And I can assure you that it works, because I went to one of the places suggested here for Lisbon and I had an amazing time. It was so fun, I kid you not. Also a good thing, it's not only clubs, like it really dives into the everyday culture as much as possible for, you know, a spread that is 4 or 5 pages long. I also want to just shout out the New York spread, because New York is such a typically gay city. What new thing you're going to bring? Here they took a really fresh perspective. They said the best straight friendly things to do in NYC. So they took a completely different approach, and like queer spaces where you can bring your straight friends. I don't have many, but I do have some, and I would love to do these things. The writing was great. It was so friendly. It felt like talking to a really knowledgeable friend that is telling you about all these cool spots that you want to check out. I think the visual layout and all the pictures and illustrations enhanced the reading experience. And that's great, because in books like this one, sometimes the graphic aspect can get either in the way of the reading experience or just to be neutral, and like it doesn't really matter. Here it was just so well integrated. It's unbelievable to me that 4 people worked on this, because it feels like such a cohesive thing. And I know I've been gushing about it for way too long. I just got excited. I just really, really love it. And now that I am free, I'm going to be exploring London. Moving on. Okay, sorry if the angle changed. Actually, no, very sorry, because it's not as good. Anyways, it's so chaotic, but it's part of the brand. I'll tell you about one more book, because I want to edit this really, really quickly and get it out. This is Diary of a Swedish Shepherd. Oh, the title is On Sheep, and it is the Diary of a Swedish Shepherd by Axel Lindén, and translated into English by Frank Perry. This is so exactly what it says on the tin. So basically, this guy was a literature professor, I think. And one day he was like, I'm sick of commuting. The city has nothing to offer me or my family. Let's go live on the farm. He becomes a sheep farmer. I got this in Birmingham. I don't know why. I just went to the Foils, of course, to check out the Foils. Very depressing place. It's probably one of the saddest bookshops I've ever seen. I mean, I'm sure people who work there are lovely, but the place itself, so sad. In any case, instead of getting any of the other things I've been meaning to get for a while, I just saw this and I was like, it's like a quick read. And my brain was very muddy at the time, because I was working on my last essay and a paper for a conference. So I need something relaxing. And this was very relaxing. Like, it has this quote that I really, really loved. If you're afraid of being lonely, you've probably never enjoyed true companionship. If you're afraid of being insignificant, bah. It also has reflections such as the sheep seem content. They like lying on slight slope and looking down, as though they were in control. And it has these little drawings. What I like about it is that it literally is just his journal, and some entries are just whatever. You know, when he first wrote this, he wasn't trying to make it more illuminating or deeper or whatever. It's just what he felt. Sometimes he realizes he cares about the sheep more than he realized, or some of the sheep are sick. And it's just nice, especially as someone who is urbanite, born and raised, and I don't have this experience of rurality. It's just an interesting exercise in the everyday. I read stuff like this all of the time from a city perspective, and it's completely different because there is such an absence of hecticness here, which makes it, of course, like really placid, but at the same time there are things that are going on and sometimes he feels bad and stuff like that, and I really enjoyed it. All right, and that was it for this video. Let me know what you've been reading, what you're excited to read, and anything that you want to let me know can go down below. See you next time. Even get there, which is great because gotcha. Yeah, what do I usually say?